There is a war psychosis in Europe.
This statement by Viktor Orban, the controversial Prime Minister of Hungary, a country which is a part of the European Union, hints at one of the core issues influencing the elections in the 27 member states of the bloc set to conclude on June 9. At stake is the makeup of the next European Parliament, the direct link between Europeans and the EU's institutions. Polls for the European Parliament traditionally focus on issues affecting their daily lives, such as the cost of living, farm policies, climate change, and so on. But this time around, an unexpected topic has surged to the forefront, and that is Israel's months-long war on Gaza and the larger issue of Palestine. The war has divided the more than 300 million voters between the right and the left amid polarized politics and increased nationalism. Politicians from left-leaning parties have been vocal about Palestine in election campaigns. Art Botenga, from Belgium's Leftist Workers' Party, and an EU lawmaker campaigning to hold his seat, told Al Jazeera, "While travelling around the country to campaign, I've seen people talking about classic election topics like purchasing power, climate change and migration, but this year, discussions over Palestine have been a central topic. I think EU citizens have seen how establishment politicians really like to speak about Ukraine and say how much the bloc really needs to support Ukraine and give them weapons and money to win the war. But then with Palestine, there has been a degree of hypocrisy and double standards. People want this to end. So how politicians address Palestine will influence the European elections." Millions of people in the EU and across the globe have been protesting for months, demanding a ceasefire to the war which Hamas claims has killed more than 37,000 Palestinians since the October 7th attack. 1,139 people were reportedly killed in that attack on Israel. In Brussels, even diplomats and staff members of EU institutions took to the streets, an unusual move by civil servants. EU members Spain and Ireland even formally recognised Palestine as a state. Norway, a non-EU country, has also recognised Palestine. Other countries have vowed to follow. Meanwhile, EU lawmakers from right-leaning political groups have taken either a cautious stance or refrained from commenting on the conflict between Israel and Palestine. An indication of this cautious stand is centre-right candidate and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen's campaign video, where she seems to be trying to distance herself from the war in Gaza and hasn't posted any pictures from her meetings with Israeli and Palestinian officials. Europe's main centre-right grouping, once considered fringe, is expected to make major gains and even come top across the EU when first projections emerge later on June 9th by not taking a clear stand on Israel's war on Gaza and pushing the anti-migrant rhetoric. France's National Rally, Italy's Brothers of Italy and Austria's Freedom Party are leading in the polls, as is Belgium's separatist and anti-immigration party, Vlaams Belang. The Palestinian permanent representative to the International Atomic Energy Agency, Salah Abdel Shafi, in an interview with Al Jazeera, pointed to the right-wing's shift from being an ally of the Arabs in the Middle East to becoming a staunch supporter of Israel over the last few years. Shafi said, "Europe's extreme right-wing parties have realized in order for them to be accepted, they should be loyal to Israel. In essence, these are anti-Semitic parties. However, politically speaking, they are supporters of Israel because they think internationally they will be accepted if they have a pro-Israeli position. If I remember, 20-30 years ago, right-wing parties were friends of Arabs. I remember. Here in Austria, Jörg Haider visited Saddam Hussein. He visited Gaddafi. He made strong statements against Israel. His party, the same party, today is one of the biggest supporters of Israel. They even issued a statement once saying that we should move the Austrian embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. But if you look at their program and history, they are anti-Semites. So again, it is a political tactic by these parties to be accepted and to mobilize against immigration from the Middle East. So we do see the threat of the rise of extreme right-wing parties. This phenomenon was reflected in the Netherlands elections held last year, which saw far-right anti-immigration leader and a strident anti-Islam firebrand Geert Wilders win a dramatic victory. Amid the war in Gaza, the Dutch politician formed a new coalition that's so pro-Israel and pro-Jewish that its founding contract promises to look into moving the Dutch embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. This marks an unprecedented departure from the Middle East policies of all its predecessors, not only in the Netherlands but in all of Western Europe. While voting in the current general elections, Wilders doubled down on the anti-migrant rhetoric, demanding more votes for the right-wing party and its candidates.
If you want to change the asylum policy, you also have the influence of the European Union with all the guidelines that we are bound on. And if you want to change that, you also need to have a strong presence in the European Parliament and make sure that if necessary, we will be able to change the European guidelines in order to be in charge of our own immigration policy and asylum policy.
Inches Goldschmidt, a Jewish voter from Europe, who is also a rabbi, narrated his dilemma in an opinion piece for Politico when he wrote, "Across Europe, mainstream and left-leaning parties that have traditionally been strong supporters of democracy and minority rights have grown more critical of Israel and more sympathetic to the continent's growing anti-Semitism. Meanwhile, right-leaning parties, including some on the far right that have historically espoused anti-Semitism, are now more supportive of Israel and are taking a strong stand against Islamic extremism, albeit one often infused with racism and xenophobia." EU lawmakers currently sit in the parliament as 7 political groups: the S&D, European People's Party, Renew Europe, Greens, European Free Alliance, European Conservatives and Reformists, Identity and Democracy, and the Left. The Israel-Palestine conflict, as well as the recognition of Palestine as a state, have become something of a litmus test for the European elections, according to a European Parliament staff member cited by Al Jazeera. Several EU countries have seen violent attacks in the run-up to the vote. An attack on Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen left her with minor whiplash and forced her to halt campaigning. In the eastern city of Dresden in Germany, Social Democrat candidate Matthias Ecke was seriously hurt in an attack by teenagers, and a Green activist was attacked, while in Berlin a former minister was hit over the head. Slovak President Robert Fico narrowly escaped with his life after he was shot while meeting supporters last month. Germany's Interior Minister Nancy Faeser has warned of a new dimension of anti-democratic violence amid elections. An overwhelming number of voters were hoping for a higher turnout this election.
I believe that this time there will be a trend that will be opposite to abstention. There is a silent majority that has always been there and did never go to vote in the past, because they were disgusted by the politicians from the last 50 years. I believe that now they will vote. It's underrated and promotion is weak. The promotion runs roughly a couple of weeks before that. It should be more heavily publicized year-round, but I think the young people are going to vote more than the older ones. These elections are underestimated.
Voting began on June 6th in the Netherlands, followed by Ireland and the Czech Republic on June 7th, then Italy, Latvia, Malta and Slovakia on June 8th. The majority of EU member states voted on June 9th. How Europeans vote will shape the direction of the EU over the next 5 years on issues that don't just affect the bloc, including greater integration or increased nationalism, but also topics that impact the world such as climate change, migration and war.